Hey, today I want to talk about my crazy ass weed addiction, which lasted like 17 years. And before I start, just want to mention that I was previewing the past like my first 4 videos, and felt super like stiff and awkward and autistic like reading the notes and whatnot, screen prompts. So this one is totally the other end of the spectrum as part of this ongoing personal and professional development for YouTube. So with regards to the whole weed thing, started first time I smoked was 13 years old, and I remember it vividly. One friend who had gone to Australia for a few years, she came back and she was like, the cool girl, and she had been smoking weed out in Australia, and she like knew how to prepare it and everything, and at that time I was completely clueless. So a few of us, we got like a little bag, she prepared it, and we went up to a race course just close to where we live in Epsom Downs, and we all smoked it together, like over the rolling hills just outside of London in the countryside. And it was absolutely divine and absolutely magical, and that was the start of my illustrious affair with weed. And I remember just being completely awe-inspired, feeling so overwhelmingly euphoric and blissful and relaxed and chilled and peaceful, and it was life-changing. I came home that evening and I ate like 5 persons worth of food, and that was just the most cathartic experience ever. And after that first smoke at 13, I say I was using monthly for, until I was maybe 15. And of course in the summers or holidays when I was with friends, we'd be like using a lot more. Excuse me. But it was like, monthly until 15 or so. And around the time of 15, 16, I started to pick up my own weed, and I started to smoke my own weed. I remember the first time, like by myself, I remember the first time that I did it from home. I like waited for my mum, my brother to go out one like school night, and I smoked it, and I went on like a wild trip. And it was just brilliant. It was like my little secret and something I could do to relax and unwind. And I remember like putting my towel underneath the door and opening my window late at night and burning incense and having to like pee in a bottle so I didn't have to like open the door and go out to the toilet in the middle of the night and all of this kind of stuff. And by that time, 16 onwards, and after smoking at my home by myself, it became, as much as I really could, weekly, daily, as much as I could really afford. And those were the days where like 8 bags, like an eighth, would last like, a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks sometimes. So it was, really economical back then. And so that was around the time that I had like the dream about like going down the rabbit hole, which I speak about in my other videos, and kind of knowing that I was going to descend into some type of madness and come back and be like rehabilitated and re-emerge throughout that process. But pretty soon after I was smoking weekly, daily, then panic attacks started to come. At that point I was, really high achieving. I'd just won a scholarship to Epsom College in Surrey, and I was started there and integrating in. And I remember having these like overwhelming panic attacks where I'd be just like all consumed with heat and fear and all of those characteristic things in front of like my housemaster or my tutors or my teachers. And I mean, this would happen like not very often at the start, and I could kind of like rub it off or not think much about it, but the kind of bodily sensations were so strong and real and like all consuming. And now I look back, that was definitely the start of like my descent from being like very open socially, very confident, very kind of charismatic, and as the years went by, just like kind of becoming more and more introverted and more insular and more autistic, embodying those traits. So then for the next couple of years I was smoking more and more regularly. I would smoke daily if I could, every single weekend, like 100%. And I was playing rugby at the time, so I'd try and balance it between rugby and all of the other, bits and bobs that were going on. And I managed to kind of hold it down and keep it going, get my fitness up. I managed to kind of, deal with the panic attacks and deal with all of the awkwardness that came with my smoking, and like the decrease in confidence, and also the decrease in like my like strong friendships and relationships. And then it used to kind of progress into smoking before school, and throughout the day we'd sneak out and smoke. And I went to a school where we started at like 8 a.m, finished at 6 p.m, so it was a pretty long day, and we'd like sneak in and out, be smoking, and then kind of just like hanging out with people because they had weed, people that I didn't even like, I wouldn't necessarily hang out with, but because they had money, because they had weed, because they gave me access to it, then we'd create these like contrived, awkward friendships around it, just like using and extorting, basically. Pretty kind of not a nice way to be or a way to interact, and I'm sure that had like a massive impact on my mental health in so many ways. And by the time I got to like my last year in school, the last few months, I was like a mess. I was literally just holding it together. Every time I'd kind of get in front of a teacher or someone with authority, I'd like break out in like the most horrific of sweats, like panic attack, anxiety sweats. And I'm not just talking like a few beads like running down my face. I'm talking like as if I'd literally come out the shower. My shirt would be sticking to my body, dripping off every single part of my body, my trousers sticking to my legs. I remember, sometimes my pants would be wet, and they'd carry on being wet for like the whole day after, like the whole school day, but just because I was sweating so much. And friendships plummeted. I became just like such a idiot, like such a like I wouldn't want to have been friends with me at that moment. But anyway, made it through that, and then ended up at university. And by the time I got to university, I was just like smoking like a chimney 24/7. And in the UK we have these like maintenance grants when you go to university. So it was the first time I had like thousands of pounds like lying around that would come from the government. Some would be a grant you wouldn't have to pay back, and some would be like a loan that you would. But everything just got spent on weed, basically, and my accommodation where I was living in London. And I remember going on the tube, and every single day without fail on the tube, I'd travel like 2 or 3 stops to university. I'd have the most horrific panic attacks, full sweating, completely paranoid, completely just have to run off the train, like could only do like 1 stop at a time. It was just absolutely horrendous. And I had a therapist at the time, and I remember mentioning to them, oh yeah, I feel like everyone's looking at me on the tube and this and that. And I mean, of course people were looking at me because I was literally covered in water, from head to toe, and like wiping off my face, and had like just in such a mess. But also I was like paranoid as fuck, so that didn't help. And the therapist at the time kind of mentioned it to me, being like, do you think this could have anything to do with the weed? And I remember getting like so triggered and so defensive at that time, being like, how dare he like kind of insinuate that this has anything to do with the weed. This is, going down all of that like rabbit hole. But yeah, of course it did. And it was just an extension of like all the panic and bad mental health that was happening from like 16 onwards. So like I mentioned in previous videos, by that time I had work experience and all different stuff like all around the world within finance, and I was like hell-bent on career in finance, making loads of money, being like the macho, bravado kind of classic finance image, which was what my school was and my scholarship trained me for, basically. And considering my previous personality, I was like the perfect candidate for that. And yet by the time it got to uni and in London and smoking every day and deteriorating mental health, like I was like the complete opposite of what I used to be. And that's why I essentially wrote off the career in finance. I used many excuses, like, oh yeah, it's not for me, this and that. But the fact of the matter was that I, number one, couldn't face being in front of people. I couldn't face even being in front of classmates. I couldn't face being around others. I couldn't even bear to think of the interview process and how horrific that would be. And I just wanted to like smoke and get high, and I'll talk about it a lot more as time unfolds, but it's been so medicinal for me in so many ways. Without it I don't think I could have continued to kind of function, and yet at the same time it like ruined me in so many ways. So it's been like a slow process of kind of coming to terms that it's been both like a savior and also a curse. So anyway, after that time went on and uni finished, and still smoking a lot, and just after uni finished I met the Hare Krishna monks. And I'd met them before, but I stayed with them for a period of like 3 or 4 months. Some of it in England, some of it in India. And until that point, maybe I was 22 at that time, Since I was 16 and smoking daily, that was the longest break I had, 3 or 4 months away from weed. I didn't smoke weed when I was living with them. I was living their strict devotional lifestyle kind of thing. So, and that was interesting, and I missed it so much, like the smoking. And as soon as I got back from that trip to India, I started smoking again. And I was actually meant to then go and live with them for another 3 months, in the temple, but I didn't, because I was just smoking and getting high all the time, and I kind of cancelled that program they had. So, and then time kept moving forward, and then was still smoking and just doing my thing, but exploring the healing arts, still kind of not understanding or integrating fully that the weed was a massive issue and part of the problem why I wasn't kind of functioning in the way that I'd been trained by school or by university or that kind of career path and trajectory. So still smoking but exploring healing, different retreat centers, different modalities, different meditation centers. And then it became manageable, things were okay. I was kind of dealing with the panic, the anxiety. It hadn't gone, dealing with the depression, the kind of the in and out of delusions, all of that kind of stuff, but it was manageable. And then I went to China to teach English for 6 months, and the first up until literally a few hours before my flight, I was smoking, and this was around 24. And then I went to China, and for 3 months I was there, and then I met this guy. We had a breakup. I was really heartbroken, and I came home for a few days just to see my mum when I had a week off. And I smoked in that week. And then I went back to China, and we found weed in China, me and my friends, so I was smoking there when I went back. Not often, but a bit. So around 24 was the next kind of tolerance or sobriety break I had, which was 3 months max, and then a month here or there. And then various other things happened on the way. So I spent a month in Peru doing some shamanic training, not long after China and just before COVID hit, and obviously wasn't smoking there, but when I wasn't smoking weed, then I'd be smoking tobacco. So then I started to kind of get that whole tobacco thing, and tobacco is so strong, oh my gosh, so strong, but weed is strong in a different way. And so the years kept kind of unfolding, and then it got to 27, 28, and we had those different shamans coming to stay at our house, this time the Yawanawa tribe, and some of their team kind of said to me, you should really consider stop smoking, at least for just a few months, have a little break. But at that time I was so puffed up and so much Icarus, flying so close to the sun, so puffed up. This tribe was staying in our house, and we met them in Brazil, and how my mum and I are doing this healing thing, and we're so brilliant, and we're the perfect example, and all this rubbish. And so I was on top of the world, and I didn't care what they said. I didn't listen to anything they said about the tolerance break. And it was from then at 28 that it really started to kind of go downhill, in the sense that I just became so much more delusional and kind of borderline psychotic, and thinking that I was this great healer and mystic and empath, and just awkward. Now I kind of talk about it and integrate it, and yet I kept going. At that time, I then went traveling. I had some money with me, and I went to India, and I just kept smoking, And then basically I turned 29 by then, and then I was smoking literally all day every day in India, and drinking weed, drink bhang, like this kind of intoxicating beverage. Some people use it ceremonially, other people just get like fucked up on it. And I would do a fair share of both, but would drink it to kind of take the edge off things. And then had like my full-blown psychotic episodes, which I've spoken about previously before. Everything has been like undiagnosed, which has been kind of, strange. But definitely I've been like so out there. That resulted in like the first arrests in India, and the detention in the psych ward for like 48 hours. And that was some scary shit, and like me tearing open my hand and having to have that surgery, having to fly back to the UK for that surgery, and that was kind of scary. But at the same time I was still kind of puffed up, still thought I was this mystic. Just before that happened, I had met the Dalai Lama, touched his feet, he touched my head, got photos, felt like I was kind of, invincible. So embarrassing, but that's really kind of where I was with all of that. And then I came back to the UK and I stopped smoking for like 1 month, and sober, integrating, like completely depressed. Obviously I'd been using it for like over a decade every day, apart from those few tolerance breaks I mentioned by this point. But didn't think much of it and just kept going and going and going. I forgot to say, the amount of weed I've kind of like also stolen from my brother, and he smokes a lot. He's never got as like fucked up as I have, but still has in many ways. But that caused so many frictions in our relationship, because I'd always be like getting weed from him or stealing weed from him, and he would like hate it when I do that. But he was like a complete addict with it too. So anyway, after that, like another month's sobriety break, after I came back from India and the operation, went back to India, but this time wasn't smoking, got in some more trouble with the police. But I think that was more kind of just like residual stuff from like the previous like breaks, and kind of all the THC kind of like working out of my body. And then kind of did pretty well throughout the rest of that time, until like I turned 30, and then things got like really ugly when I was like smoking a lot, and just kind of if it was like I got to a place where, okay, I know I hadn't reached the end of the rabbit hole, I know I hadn't reached the end of the labyrinth, I know I was like venturing further and further, and something said like, you'll stop when you have to, you'll know when it's time. And I really firmly believe that. Almost like on keto, when you're eating like fatty meat or fatty food, and you just know when there's enough is enough, because you can't even stomach anymore. And so that happened around 30 with weed, and the like 2 arrests I had during that 1 week in London, and subsequent remand in Wandsworth prison. But that didn't stop like the weed smoking, so I still came out of prison after that, still like psychotic, delusional, and like having this complete break from reality. And then I smoked for like another couple months after that, in this really weird state, like running around London, doing all these prayers everywhere, doing all these ceremonies, smoking so much, thinking I was kind of being followed, thinking people were looking at me, looking at my behaviours, my interactions, everything to kind of learn from. thinking that I was by this point not just like a mystic, but thinking I was a saint or even a Buddha or God himself, incarnate, the avatar himself. And yeah, just like shocking stuff, so like kind of cringe and embarrassing, but yeah, it happened. And I really like ended up in those places, doing crazy stuff with like people I'd never hang out with, I'd never be close to, kind of having like really risky sexual encounters, and just ending up in a really scary state of mind and frame of mind where it was like, well, hold on a minute, what is going on here? And so that continued up until like February of this year, when I kind of decided, okay, enough's enough, I need to stop all this shit, because it's actually like now, I reached that point of satiation. I'd had like too much fatty ribeye steak and I could no longer eat anymore, and I was completely nauseated by it. So I ended up going to see Dr. Kamal Roop Singh, who is a brilliant healer and an actual mystic, and has done a great work for his tradition and natural medicines and supporting people with addictions. And that marked the turning point. And the thing with weed is like, I don't want to also paint this like horrific picture, like, oh, it's so bad and kids don't touch weed and don't do this, don't do that, because actually the truth is weed helped me so much in so many ways. And that plant, I tell you, it has a mind of its own, it has like a consciousness of its own, and to be in relationship with that plant for all those years in such an intense way was a real diet, a real study, a real test, and it tried and tested everything. I don't want to poo-poo it all, but I just, through this video, want to kind of show what 17 years of addiction with her, to her, in communion with her has been, and the reality of that, and where it started from the beautiful time on the hill on Epsom Downs with my young teenage friends to where it ended, which was like prison and psychosis and delusion and crumbling, risk-taking, breakages of relationships, family, embarrassment, ostracism, banishment. I just did another day of community service today. I'm still paying off those like hours, community service hours. I'm still paying off the debts of the court cases from the stupidity that I did, all the damage I caused. And it would be stupid also for me to sit here and be like, oh yeah, well, not to talk about all the good things, and I suppose I will do in another video, but yeah, it felt important to share what that addiction, what that training, what that spiritual diet, what that has done for me, and how that's interacted, how my consciousness has interacted with the consciousness of that plant, how my life has been shaped and formed and weaved along with that plant consciousness, and her shadows too, my shadows, the way she showed me my shadows, the way I got to see her shadows, and the way everything kind of came out in such a shocking, undeniable way. So I feel like I kind of have reached the end of the road with this one, and yeah, this is my first one recording in this way, just walking through the park, letting everything flow, come to me. So thanks for watching, and speak with you again soon. Ciao. Boyakasha.